All right, we're just going to give it a second for folks to start filing in here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So hello, my name is Riley, and I am the events coordinator at Next Chapter Booksellers. We're located at 38 Snelling Avenue South in St. Paul, Minnesota. We're on the corner of Grand and Snelling by McAllister College. So we recently, 1 month ago, opened up for full browsing in our store once again. So we are welcoming back our customers in our store, and we really hope to see you later this summer. At the end of the summer, we will begin doing in-person events. So we are going to be seeing the end of virtual events at the end of this month and moving towards in-person events again. I am going to surprise you with who will be our first event, but you will subscribe to our newsletter and then you can find out for yourself as soon as we announce it. So tonight we have Cary Griffith with Wolf Kill, and I am going to go ahead and introduce him. So if you make sure to go on to nextchapterbooksellers.com at the end of this webinar, you will be automatically redirected to our store's website so you can pick yourself up a copy. So award-winning author Carrie J Griffith grew up amongst the woods, fields, and emerald waters of eastern Iowa. His childhood fostered a lifelong love of wild places. He earned a BA in English from the University of Iowa and an MA in library science from the University of Minnesota. Griffith's books explore the natural world. In nonfiction, he covers the borderlands between civilization and wild places. In fiction, he enforces on the ways some people use flora and fauna to commit crimes. Well, others with more reverence and understanding of the natural world leverage their knowledge to bring criminals to justice. In both genres, readers are likely to learn something about our relationship to the natural world and the creatures who inhabit it. I was 14 the first time I visited the lakes in boreal forests of northeastern Minnesota, says Griffith, and its beauty struck me. Griffith is also the author of Gunflint Burning, Lost in the Wild, and Opening Goliath. He lives with his family in a suburb of Minnesota's Twin Cities. Welcome.
Thank you, Riley. I really appreciate that. And thanks to everyone for attending tonight. I know some of you are from out of state, but this is a bluebird evening in Minnesota. So I really appreciate your attendance to hear me talk about my next novel, Wolf Kill. Now, as a more tangible way of showing thanks, I'm going to give away a free signed copy of Wolf Kill tonight. And here's how it'll work. After the event is over, I'll get a list of registrants and I'll randomly select a person from that list. And someone will hear from me later tonight, probably more like sometime tomorrow. So I really appreciate your attendance. Another thing I'm going to do is, because it's so beautiful outside, and personally, this is at the end of our Zoom lives. Thank God. I'm zoomed out. So I'm going to keep my remarks very brief, probably be about 15 or 20 minutes. I'm going to talk about the genesis of Wolf Kill and thanks several people that are involved with producing it, and keep it brief. And then I'm just going to read 2 pages from the first chapter, 2 pages from the second chapter, and open it up for questions. As Riley may have mentioned, if you have any questions, just put them in Q&A and we'll address them at the end. I also want to thank Next Chapter Booksellers. These guys are one of the great independent bookstores in the Twin Cities. We are rich in Minnesota with independent booksellers, Next Chapter being a great example of it. If you have an opportunity, as Riley said, they just opened up their store again. Go on over there, browse around, pick up your next summer read or reads, and support the independent booksellers. We really need to do that. So I appreciate you helping out with that project. Lots of novels, particularly first novels, are written in, some people are really good at writing novels. They write them in 6 months, they write them in 12 months. I think most writers, though, would agree that their first novel took a while longer. And that was indeed the case with Wolfkill. I want to say it was probably more than 3 decades ago. I was working in a corporation. I raced home over lunch. And as I often did back then, because I had 2 young kids and was working a full-time job in corporate America, I was just scratched out 30 or 45 minutes to write whenever or wherever I could. And on this particular day, I don't know, I must have been angry or I must have had something bad going on in my life, because I ended up writing about this fictitious Iron County Gun Club. More importantly, I was writing about the 5 members of the Iron County Gun Club who were really despicable men doing terrible things in the winter wilderness in northern Minnesota. Now, years later, in 2013, that became the book Wolves. Not just that, there was a lot more to it, and it grew into that book Wolves and more than 2 decades later. Now, I think it's fair to say Wolves was produced by Adventure, published by Adventure Publications at the time. And I think it's safe to say that Adventure, they had never published fiction before. I should say many of you are probably familiar with Adventure Publications without knowing it. They published the Stan Tequila Wildlife Guides, a lot of other related nonfiction. I have several of their books. I have Wildflowers of Minnesota, Birds of Minnesota. They publish those on just about every state in the United States. Excellent, they're award-winning books and they're a great publisher. But this was their first foray into fiction and in particular into mysteries. Now they published 2 other mysteries that year, but I think it's safe to say that they didn't really know how to package the book. It was my first novel, so first novels aren't necessarily great. It was a finalist for a Minnesota Book Award, and it won a Midwest Book Award, so it was okay. And they sold approximately, I think, 3,000 copies, so it did okay. But the following year, I came out with the second Sam Rivers mystery, Savage Minnesota, that was serialized in the Minnesota's largest newspaper, the Star Tribune, over the summer. And 5 years later, according to the contract, the rights to that title came back to me. Now, the Star Tribune produced an ebook version of it, but they never produced a book version of it. And I had always wanted to see that in print. Moreover, I really knew I wanted to seriously edit that book, because when it appears in a paper, it has to be really cut down and edited significantly, and it really needed work. So I reached out, and they sold, I think, more than 3,000 copies of the ebook. So it did okay. And as I say, it was serialized. But I wanted to see it in print. So I reached out to Brett Ortler, who's the gentleman at Adventure Publications who had helped me edit and get Wolves out the door. And Brett did a great job. He was great to work with. And when I asked him if he wanted to produce a second Sam Rivers novel, Brett said, well, fiction really isn't our thing. Actually, Adventure was acquired by Keen 2 years ago, and now it's Adventure Keen, and it's a much larger organization. Brett, to his credit, was promoted to the acquisitions director, which is why I was reaching out to him now. And he said, but I tell you what, we'll run it up the flagpole and we'll see. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, I heard back from Brett, and he said, well, I think we do. I think we want to, publish. What we want to do is find you a fiction editor to work with, to work on editing Savage Minnesota. We'll create a whole new book, whole new cover, a print version, an audio version, and it'll be the second Sam Rivers. Now, more importantly, we never liked the cover on Wolves. We think that could benefit from having a fiction editor, somebody familiar with mysteries, look at it. Do you have anybody that you'd like to work with on that? And we would repackage it, re-put it out if you could, make significant revisions to it. And, this is a rare opportunity for writers. Seldom do we get a chance for do-overs. Since Wolves came out, I've published 5 other books. I took Peter Guy's year-long novel writing class. I think I've matured as a writer and hopefully improved. And I would often go back to both Savage, Minnesota and Wolves, and I'd read different sections and I'd go, oh man, I shouldn't have described it that way. I need to make changes. So I was more than happy to do that. And moreover, I recommended that they work with Mary Logue, who's a local mystery writer. She's produced more than 10 mysteries of her own. Her most recent is called The Streel, published by the University of Minnesota Press. Highly recommend it. Take a look at it. It's a great read, great book. And I've actually worked with Mary before, so she was wonderful to work for. So she took a look at Wolves to begin with. And, you know, in high school or college, when you write a paper and you think, wow, that's the best paper on tectonic plates, I think, that I've ever written, or that, you know, this is definitely, you expect to get it back with a big A on it and excellent. And it comes back and there's a C- on it and it's all marked up. Well, it wasn't quite that bad with Mary, but she did send back the Wolves manuscript completely marked up. I think every page was marked up. Moreover, as we talked, Mary had great advice. She said, Carrie, you know, all you need to do is start the action for each chapter sooner and conclude the chapter earlier, each chapter. And that is indeed what I did, as well as rewriting the whole novel. The novel is still, the plot is largely the same, and the characters are largely the same, but they're much better drawn. It's a much tighter novel. I cut 10,000 words out of that novel, and so I think it's a significantly better novel. It's much more fast-paced. It's a much more mature, seasoned novel, I think. And in fact, it's worthy of this new lovely title or lovely cover that they put out. Wow, that looks, yeah. Anyway, now I also want to thank Lillian Opsimer, who's the director of marketing there. She said, well, do you know people that could write a blurb for Wolfkill? And I reached out to several fellow writers, mystery writers, local Minnesota authors. And she sent them advanced review copies and managed that whole process. And if you read Wolfkill, you'll see their comments in here. And these guys, Kent Kruger was really generous with comments. Peter Guy was very generous. Wendy Webb, Mindy Mejia, these are all local mystery writers that you're probably familiar with. David Housewright, Brian Freeman. These guys all took a look at it and had very nice things to say about it. And I'm really honored by their comments. That was really nice. And Lillian has been great to work with. Not only did she manage that process, but we gave away 50 copies of Wolfkill on Goodreads, and we had 2,700 people sign up. So she's been wonderful to work with, and I look forward. She was the one who got this event going and several other events that are going to happen this summer. If you're interested in any of them, many of them are going to be in person. You can go to my website and you'll find them under the news and events tab. Now, the last thing I want to say about these books is they are Sam Rivers mysteries, right? And my idea for Sam Rivers, who's a special agent for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, is that he finds solace in nature. Like many of us, he loves wilderness. And not only that, he studies the flora and fauna that inhabit wilderness. So when crimes occur, as in Wolfkill, there's an alleged wolf predation of calves in a barn. When crimes occur that involve species with which he's familiar, he's a wildlife biologist and knows a lot about wolves. He is best suited to go in and begin to see anomalies in the crime that lead to larger crimes that are eventually the bad guy's undoing. That was my idea for Sam Rivers and these 4 first novels that we're putting out. Wolf Kill came out yesterday. If you read a Sam Rivers novel, you're going to learn stuff about wolf biology and morphology. In Cougar Claw, the significant revision that'll be out in 6 to 12 months, you'll learn a lot about mountain lion biology and morphology because it's integral to the story that I'm telling in that book and the murder that happens in the book. Similarly, in Killing Monarchs, you'll learn a lot about the life cycle of the monarch butterfly. Really bad drug people are using the shipments of chrysalises to schools in Minnesota to transport heroin. And you'll also learn about the North America's most venomous scorpion, bark scorpions, probably more than you want to know. Anyway, and then finally, Dead Catch, which takes place in Vermilion in northern Minnesota, is you'll learn some stuff about the commercial and recreational whitefish and walleye fishing industry in both Minnesota and in Canada. So again, all of my books are set in Minnesota. All of these first 4 Sam Rivers novels are set in Minnesota. And I hope you get a chance to pick one up at the library or maybe buy a copy. That would be great. I'd really appreciate that. And I hope you enjoy them. Now, what I was going to do is just read briefly from the introduction. Wolf Kill is divided into 4 parts, and each part begins with an epigraph. And the epigraph for the first part, got to get my cheaters on here. The legs aren't the first to go. For the first part is, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. Matthew 7:15. Before I begin writing this first chapter, I forgot to mention, I wanted to place these Sam Rivers novels in context. I already mentioned Kent Kruger. He has more than 20 of the Cork O'Connor series out there. Obviously a prolific writer. I would call those novels wilderness mysteries. Similarly, Nevada Barr has a character named Anna Pigeon, who's a park ranger. Wilderness mysteries. C.J. Box has more than 20 of those. C.J. Box has written more than 20 novels, wilderness mysteries featuring Wyoming game warden Joe Pickett. My idea, my hope is that Sam Rivers finds his place among those other wilderness mysteries. But that's the kind of subgenre that, if you wanted to know what kind of book it is, that it fits in. Okay, let me go back to this. Chapter 1. The farmhouse stood 12 miles outside Defiance, Minnesota, at least as the common raven flew. The house was a compact 2-story peak square with peeling clapboard sides and a tar paper roof. Behind the house, a stand of red pines marked a short ridge in the start of wilderness that stretched 20-odd miles to the Canadian border. To the right of the house was a barn where 3 feeder calves huddled, protected against stray wolves in the deep cold. The field beyond the barn lay blanketed in fresh snow. It was January 26th. One of the coldest nights of the year. Sheriff Dean Goddard and Deputy Smith Barnes turned into Williston Winthrop's farmhouse drive. The house was lit up like a Chinese lantern. The drive was long and narrow, and they pulled up and parked behind 2 trucks, an SUV, and Bill Hines' patrol car. Looks like a damn party, Barnes commented. That it does, Goddard agreed. As they got out of their cruiser, Hines opened the farmhouse door, stepping into the cold. He was dressed for the weather, which was well below zero. Thankfully, there was no wind, and the nearly full moon was high and clear. While Hines walked up the plowed path, the sheriff watched him zip up his policeman's jacket, then his down parka over the jacket. He flipped its hood over his short-cropped gray hair. The sheriff guessed Hines was near retirement. He hoped so, anyway. Sheriff, Hines nodded as he came forward. Hines, Goddard said. You know Smith Barnes. Sure. Hines said, nodding at Barnes. The three men were tense in the cold. It wasn't just the weather or the corpse beyond the house and barn. Hines, Defiance's town cop, had long made an effort to keep the sheriff out of Defiance's law enforcement affairs, which was fine by the sheriff, who had the rest of the county to patrol. The sheriff's office was 10 miles east of Defiance in Vermilion Falls. There had been times a crime crossed borders, requiring the two men to work together, which neither did well nor enjoyed. From the sheriff's point of view, Hines had never quite passed the smell test. And that was one reason why small town cops were best limited to the narrow confines of their own town's borders, particularly when it was a Minnesota Iron Range town like Defiance. On more than one occasion, the sheriff had received complaints about the graying lawman, but he had been forced to back off when Winthrop interceded. Now that he thought about it, the only thing Goddard appreciated past midnight and cold like this was being rid of that son of a bitch Winthrop, if the reports were true. He would no longer have to worry about pulling his punches with Hines, providing Winthrop hadn't shared their little secret. What made the sheriff edgy was his doubt that the dead man had kept his word. Now, there's sort of a guideline or a truism in writing mysteries that you never get beyond the second chapter without at least introducing your protagonist. In this case, Sam Rivers. And so the beginning of chapter 2 opens with, I'm going to read a couple of pages where we introduce Sam Rivers. Excuse me. By the time Sam Rivers arrived at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Office, Judy Rutker's message had already been broadcast to a half dozen coworkers needing a Monday morning chuckle. Rutgers was a sheep rancher who lived over 2 hours southeast of Denver, Colorado. "This is Judy Rutgers," she blurted. "Last night, one of my ewes was taken, a wolf. I got all the proof you'll need. And I'm sitting here with my rifle, hoping the cocksucker shows its ugly head. When it does, I'll be blowing it off." There was a pause during which Maureen, the office assistant, said, "Wait, she's not finished." Sam's coworkers paused over Maureen's speakerphone. "I'll give you till sundown to get out of here and look, Rivers. Then I'm setting traps." The line went dead. "Sundown," Maureen repeated, parroting Rutger's rasp. The office broke into laughter. Sam Rivers' appearance caused his coworkers to fade back to their desks. "Morning, Sam," Maureen nodded. "Maureen," he nodded back. His sallow-rimmed eyes told her all she needed to know about his weekend. She'd keep it to business, but like the rest of the staff, she was waiting for an end to Rivers' depression. Or maybe for his transfer back to National Field Operations. "Judy Rutgers has issues again." "I heard." "What should I tell her?" "Tell her I'll be out afternoon. First, I need to talk with Kay Magdalene, then finish some paperwork." He had received another troubling email he hoped Magdalene would help him track down. The anonymous emails came from a region and a past Sam thought he'd put behind him a long time ago. "Should I see if Kay's in?" "Her outback's in the lot." Maureen's ears tracked gossip like a pair of Doppler radars, and she had a mouth like a satellite radio, which is why Sam never shared anything with her. Maureen might have been the one to overhear the news about his dog, Charlie. "That's 2 Kay Magdalene visits in less than a week," she said. "You sure you feel okay?" Maureen was fishing. He almost never visited his old supervisor. "Clarence is a Rockies fan, and I have a lead on some tickets," he lied. When she didn't recognize the name, he added, "Clarence is Kay's husband. He and I go way back." Truth is, he and Kay Magdalene had worked together for more than a decade when he was a national field agent, and he had never met Clarence. Maureen nodded. "Oh, okay. I'll let Judy know you'll be there this afternoon." "Thanks, Maureen." Then he turned and disappeared into his cubicle. Charged with protecting and managing the nation's wildlife, the USFW had taken Sam Rivers, one of its best national field agents, into places no sane person would want to go. That is until a year ago, when his failing marriage and then his failing best friend, his dog Charlie, prompted him to step down from the national spotlight to take a job in local investigations. 5 years earlier, the Denver Post ran a Sunday feature on his work at the USFW entitled Saving Endangered Species One Animal at a Time. The article recounted one of his most recent cases. Rare Florida deer were being annihilated from a section of the Florida Keys. Their total disappearance from an area they'd previously inhabited was suspicious. Sam investigated, and after some digging and a few lucky breaks, he discovered a small group of developers who believed concern for the key deer, which the USFW estimated to number around 800 animals, was negatively impacting their development plans. They'd hired a South Florida hunter to rid the proposed development site of any trace of the small endangered deer. And they would have succeeded if the hunter hadn't begun selling key deer skins, hooves, horns, and venison on the black market. The article called Sam Rivers the Predator's Predator, a moniker that stuck, at least within his office in the USFW. There was a picture of his 6-foot 2-inch frame standing in front of the South Florida bulldozer he had single-handedly idled. His square shoulders and 195 pounds looked small in front of the huge shovel blade, but his greasy black hair, disheveled undercover clothes, and 4 days beard growth made him look like the swamp rats he'd hunted. The article recounted how, before it was all over, Sam had to fight his way out of a backwoods bar. His then wife, Maggie, had been proud of the Denver Post's coverage. She cut out the photo and taped it to their fridge. That's a sample of Wolf Kill. If you acquire a copy, I hope you enjoy it. And now I'm going to address any questions. I told you I'd keep it brief. And now I'm going to address any questions if there are any. Doesn't look like it. So, yeah, I see some chat. Looks good. There are no questions. I really appreciate you guys coming out tonight. Thank you very much.
Nope. If you look at the Q&A, some are coming in.
Okay. Chuck asks, how long do you dwell on descriptions to your characters? A mouth like satellite radio is a good description. And yes, I spend a lot of time, and I think I mentioned earlier, I spend a lot of time revising it. And I do try to come up with creative ways to describe things. And I did really like that, the Doppler radar and the satellite radio images, because they really worked for Maureen. She plays a very small part in it, but she's a real gossip, a house gossip. And Cindy asks how much research I do for each novel. And the truth is I do a lot of research. For Wolf Kill, for this novel, I not only studied wolf biology and wolf morphology, learned, for example, how big a wolf print is compared to and how big a wolf is compared to a coyote. I also learned about coy wolves, which are the offspring from coyotes and wolves. I never knew they existed, but they do. You'll learn a little bit about those just briefly in Wolf Kill. And I spent a lot of time, not only that, but studying the political issues involved with wolf management in Minnesota. As if any of you have paid any attention to that in the recent past, in the last 10 years, it's very controversial. Farmers, and that all gets covered in the novel in a fictional way. So yeah, I do, and I spend a lot of time with the other species I cover, again, doing research on mountain lions, monarch butterflies, the fishing industry. So I do spend a lot of time doing that. There is a question from Doug, if there's a 5th Sam Rivers novel. Yeah, I do have a 5th one in the works. I've written a few chapters of it. Sam Rivers is really a confessor in that, and it involves a woman who goes into the Boundary Waters seeking revenge. Her name is Diana Hunter, and I really like that novel. And she ends up trying to get confessions out of these bad men in the Boundary Waters, bad young men, but things go from bad to worse and unexpectedly, and she ends up killing all four of them, sort of by accident. And my hope is that these novels do well, and there'll be a sixth and a seventh. And, you know, you got people like Kent Kruger, as I said, who've produced more than 20. So there's a lot of longevity space in there. There's some questions that could, do I prefer writing fiction or nonfiction? You know, it's very different writing both, but I have to say, and they're so dissimilar that I love to write both. But writing nonfiction involves a lot more research. Cindy asked if I do research. Man, with a nonfiction book, I'm working on one about the July 4th, 99 blowdown now. I think I've interviewed more than 50 people, and you have to transcribe their comments, and it's just a lot more work. When you're writing fiction, it's a lot more difficult from an imagination or creativity perspective, but you can sit in your kitchen or wherever you happen to write, and you can just begin writing, and it's a very different experience. I have to say I love both, but I'd have to say writing fiction is easier. I think there's a question here if my books are suitable for young adult readers. You know, one of the things I edited out of Wolves was the amount of cussing and bad language that appeared in it. Now, not to say you heard me have a few off-color words in the brief sections I wrote. There still is a fair amount, but there's some pretty brutal scenes. But I think YA is pretty sophisticated these days, and they've probably seen worse stuff on TV. So these would probably be interesting. There's a lot of mystery in these, even though they're kind of a thriller, and that readers know who has done the awful crime from the very beginning. There's still a lot of other mysteries in the book that need to be solved, and I think young readers in particular like that kind of thing. Let me go to the Q&A. Sam River, where was Sam Rivers born? Well, that's covered in the book Wolf Kill. It turns out he was born and raised outside of Defiance, Minnesota. So he was in northern Minnesota. Someone asked how long it took to write this book. To edit Wolf Kill down from Wolves took about 3 to 4 months, right? I used it quite a bit. I spent a lot of time. I spent most of my writing time editing it down. But again, I think I wrote some of the first things without knowing the whole story more than 3 decades ago. So these other novels that have come since then have taken much less time to write, now that I have a better sense of the character and, a better sense of where I'm headed. How does the Iron Range setting and attitudes figure into the story? Well, that's a great question, because in the book, I talk about how the Iron Range has sort of fallen on hard times. I mean, used to be that many people could get a great living working in the mines, but then the mines have largely been automated, and there are fewer people, and the amount of money, like in other industries, is not as great as it once was. So I think the Iron Range has sort of fallen on hard times. And if that is part of the incentive for these bad characters in the Iron County Gun Club to do the crimes that they do, in part to make money. What were the greatest changes from the initial version of the story Wolves to this iteration? And was it difficult to accept the suggestions Mary Logue offered? I'll answer that last part first. Mary was great. It was not difficult at all to accept her suggestions. I thought they were all excellent. They were really good. The greatest changes, I have to say, I think, was cutting 10,000 words out of this book and touching every page. Those were the biggest changes from this version. It's a much more fast-paced, I think, a better written novel. And those are the biggest changes from Wolves to this one. What actual towns, if any, were composited to form Defiance? Towns on the Iron Range, places like Virginia, for example. This all takes place in a fictitious county called Vermilion County. Lake Vermilion is a place I've gone to quite a bit. It doesn't feature in this particular, it does feature in the fourth novel, Dead Catch, but not in this one. But I've been up there. I can't point to a specific one, but any of those in the Quad cities up there, Virginia, Hibbing, and smaller, those are good examples, if you've ever driven through those, of the kind of town that is Defiance. And I have a pretty good description of Defiance in the book. It's a very small Iron Range town. Will Sam Rivers ever come to the big city? Sort of like Marge Gunderson in Fargo. Well, it's funny you asked that because, excuse me, not like Marge Gunderson, but the Cougar Claw, the second Sam Rivers novel, actually takes place in Savage, Minnesota, but in a wild part of Savage, Minnesota, the Minnesota River Valley. The third one, Killing Monarchs, actually takes place in and around the Twin Cities, but it features wilderness flora and fauna in conducting the crimes that happen, terrible crimes. And so again, both of those are sort of more of an urban setting. But then I'm back up north with Dead Catch, the fourth Sam Rivers novel. It's hard to read about animals being hurt. Does your book include graphic descriptions that create images that won't go away? That's an interesting comment, and I don't want to. There was an iteration of Wolves way back when in which I described the predation of wolf dogs on calves in detail. I don't get into that. I cut that because I felt it was too graphic. There aren't really a lot of animals that get hurt. In fact, some get saved in this book. So yeah, I don't think it's too bad. There are some feeder calves that get slaughtered by hybrid wolf dogs, but I don't really describe that. You see the remnants of it. What inspired you to write your fiction series books? I'll tell you, I love the wilderness. I've always loved wild places. I've always been interested in the flora and fauna. I always thought it'd be interesting back to do you do much research and study of that? I do, and I really enjoy it. That's one of the reasons I really like to write these books. And I also think wilderness, I cover in my nonfiction books as well. I think really interesting things happen on the edge of wilderness and in wilderness. When we walk away from civilization and we're, basically back to the Stone Age, of course, admittedly, in many instances, with the accoutrements of modern age, the cell phones and everything else. But cell phones don't always work in wilderness. So that's something that has always really intrigued me, and I've always really loved wild places. Who will play Sam Rivers in the Netflix series based on the books? I have no idea. Let's hope it happens. Have my nonfiction books influenced my novels? Only in so much as I will sometimes leverage the settings that I've been to in researching those novels and use them in the novels. The ones that I've written and researched for the nonfiction books, use those in my novels. For example, I'm really familiar with Vermilion. That was part of the blowdown. I've been up there many times, and so I'm very familiar with that area. And many of the things there, not all of them, it's still a fictitious Lake Vermilion, but I do describe a lot of things that are familiar to anyone who is familiar with Lake Vermilion. Okay, I think that's it. So again, I want to thank you guys for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. And I hope you have a great evening. Hope you have a great summer. If you're interested in attending any of the in-person events where I'm actually signing books and stuff, check out my website. And again, I appreciate you coming. Thanks. And have a great evening, great summer.
All right. Thank you so much for that whole discussion and Q&A. So as you guys know, Wolf Kill is available at Next Chapter. So please get yourself a copy. Also, please subscribe to our newsletters so that you guys can know about our upcoming events, because we'll be doing in-person events at the end of the summer. We look forward to seeing you guys all in the store, and thank you again for your book and being here in this. It's a very nice evening. It's very nice of you to
Get out
to
there.
your event today. All right. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thanks, Riley.